Have you ever asked yourself, is there more? Are there other worlds to explore?
Hello, dear friends, subscribers, viewers, supporters, and anyone new to this channel. Tonight I'm going to be embarking on another episode of my show, BLU Review, and I'm going to be dipping back into this series I've been working on called Extreme/Forgotten. I've defined what my parameters are for that a number of times in other videos, but to be quick, something that is in some way extreme or taboo or controversial or out there kind of film that has not, for whatever reason, and the reasons differ with all the different films, has never received a proper North American Blu-ray release, which you would think would be the biggest possible market. Tons of Blu-rays of all kinds of genre and obscure films have flooded the market. Slowed down a bit during the COVID years. The people at the boutique labels continued working on their extras for these things and making them as, incredible as possible. And, I just have to say that they've missed a few, and there's different reasons. I've covered quite a few before. I don't want to get back to that series because I think there's some that are really worthwhile. So the one I want to talk about today is one that I have a theory about why it's not on Blu-ray yet, but I don't have any confirmation. I could put on a journalist cap and maybe email some people to confirm, and I may yet do that, but not for now. Just going to speculate, and I want to tell you about this film. Sorry. It isn't a boring film, I promise. I'm just a boring person. This film came out in 1973 and was an Academy Award nominated documentary. The subject matter has always been controversial. The main figure discussed and titular character figure, because he's not a character. Well, he's a character, but I mean he's a living being. Yeah, I mean just the very nature of things. Always been controversial. But when he died a few years ago, things kind of went into overdrive, and there was a great deal of reactionary invective hurled at people who, followed him. When I say followed him, I mean were interested in him, collected books about him or pictures or paraphernalia. And I'm just going to tell you, I was one of those people for quite a long time. My perspective has changed a bit, and I'd like to use this film actually as a way to explain. I don't know, it's been a journey. I've been on a long journey with this film and all kinds of related books. So without further ado, this is Manson, occasionally erroneously called Manson, a documentary. It's from 1973. Now, as you can see, this is a very cheap DVD release. However, this is a custom DVD release from the director himself. And he was also a cinematographer, Robert Hendrickson. So, a few years ago, I really don't know how, I found out that Robert Hendrickson was selling, like collector to collector, copies, nice DVD copies, burnt from his own original film masters. And I can't remember how much it cost, to be honest. Not a lot. But he would sign and personalize them. So let me show you mine. This one is like to Henry Covert, Robert Hendrickson. That is so cool. Sorry, it's cool. All right. So if you are a Manson hater, when I say hater, I don't mean I understand why you would hate him. What I mean is if you're a hater of the subculture that grew up around him and the legend that grew up around him, I'm not grasping for the right word. I'm grasping, but I'm not getting the right words to pass through my tongue out into the ether. He's iconic. That's one word. For better or worse, there are a lot of iconic serial killers. Of course, Manson is not a serial killer by common modern forensic definitions. However, he motivated some people to become serial killers. But again, it was cult activity. It wasn't a lone person hunting, killing two or more people, methodically taking a cool off period and then getting back on the track. All those earmarks have nothing to do with the Manson family. They were methodical, but they were reckless and chaotic. They got caught. They got caught pretty easily, just, on car theft. It's like Al Capone getting caught for his fucking taxes. So I grew up hearing about Charles Manson. I owned the DVD for a while, but as a kid, I saw it on TV. It was a 2-part miniseries, 2 hours each night in a row. Of course, ads were in there everywhere. And Steve Railsback, who went on to become famous for other cult movies, but he played Charles Manson. Memorably, Anthony Herrera played one of the crusading detectives. And I can't remember who his real life analog. Anthony Herrera is not known to really many people unless you follow soap operas, because a few years after Helter Skelter, which is the name of the movie, he went on to have a long run as the ultimate soap villain, James Stenbeck, on As the World Turns. But these are the days before he was really hamming it up and chewing the scenery like he later did. Of course, I didn't know that when I first saw it as a kid, because that was before he was on As the World Turns. But when I rented it years later, I was like, oh, there's James Stenbeck. So my mother and father and I watched it. I believe my mom read the book, but she may have checked it out of the library. So Helter Skelter was a book by Vincent Bugliosi. He was the prosecuting attorney in the case of the LoBianco slayings, which, you may or may not, I'm sure you know about them, even if you're just, seeing the alternate universe. What if they were saved by 2 aging macho dudes in Hollywood called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino, which is an entertaining movie while you're watching it, but the subtext is extremely conservative and reactionary. And I'm not saying that because they kill the Manson family, and the Manson family, the Manson family represents the counterculture. They represent the old guard, the John Wayne kind of cats. And rather than pass the torch, they use the torch and fucking annihilate them, literally. And that movie leaves a bitter taste in my mouth. It doesn't really sit well with me. That perspective, I think, it's just as ludicrous as the Hitler sequence and Glorious Bastards. I mean, but again, people are going to be watching this and saying, but it's brilliant. This is why. This is meta cinema. This is Tarantino. He's rewriting the world. He's doing. To me, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood was a science fiction film. His first, maybe, unless you count Glorious Bastards. Where what if? It was a what if film. Takes a while for you to figure that out, unless you've read about it going in. I didn't read much about it going in. I just knew the cast and that they were going to have real people as characters like Sharon Tate and Charles Manson mingled with fictional characters. But anyway, a friend of mine pointed out to me when he saw it, I said, you should check this out. It's pretty fun. And he said, I'm really disturbed by the subtext here. It's a little offensive. I mean, because the counterculture wasn't just Charles Manson, but they represented it for a lot of people, and so there's always been a reactionary, backlash against them. I remember on Dinah Shore's show in the mid '70s, she asked Jimmy Osterberg, is Iggy Pop what he was most proud of or known for, and he said, "Well, I killed the '60s." And yeah, in a way, just as the Tate LaBianca murders, definitely. So the whole Flower Child thing became very dark and steeped with blood. So I'm rambling because I don't think this is something I want to sit and go, this is what happened, this is what happened, this is what happened. Because you guys either know it or know some of it or know Tarantino's version of it or the Helter Skelter movie or James Van Bever's really good movie, The Manson Family, which I reviewed on this channel. But I suggest you watch this because this was shot throughout the trial. Some of the footage is from before they were caught. They collected footage because they were always filming. They lived in the Spahn Ranch. George Spahn was an old man, and he was blind. He had been a movie producer and quite a lech. So these young hippie chicks, even though he was blind, kind of excited him, and he would let them roam around and crash and live on the Spahn Ranch. So the Spahn Ranch, in and of itself, has become part of the legend. There was an industrial band called Spahn Ranch. And there have been stories set there, and there were other films set there. I believe some of I'm pretty sure Al Adamson shot some of his films there. Al Adams is a character for another day, but he was quite a character. I always wonder what happened if he had made a movie about Manson. So before I go down that rabbit hole, or to avoid going down it, I'm just going to read some of this material. And this is going to tell you what the movie is and how it was publicized. Then I'm going to break down what I think of the movie, when I encountered it, what it's meant to me over the years. And then I'm going to hopefully wrap it up with, this is where I sit now with the movie, but also with the whole Manson thing. So, the horrifying and shocking story that never ends. Okay. I'm not going to read all of these. The hottest film in some time, says Rona Barrett. This startling documentary should be placed into a time capsule for study and insight by future generations. It is a multi-level, in-depth reflection of our life and times. And my eyesight's getting so bad that I can't really read that person's name. I'm sorry. This is not a film about a killer. It is about a troubled society, says ABC TV. The most brilliant picture this year, says London Evening News. Profound, shocking, impossible to forget once you've seen it, says One review, I'm not sure, from Belgium. The horror film to end all horror films. Probably the scariest since the original Dracula. Extraordinary, hair-raising, and remarkable cinematic achievement, says the International Herald Tribune. Manson is a powerful, disturbing look at society, says Variety. Rex Reed says Manson is destined to send America into another paroxysm of terror. That's Rex Reed, man. He always had his finger on the pulse of America in the late 60s and 70s through his flamboyant persona and his extremely biased, opinionated film reviews. I'm not knocking Rex Reed. He played in Myra Breckenridge. No, okay. So notice on the back is that this is basically collector to collector or fan to fan. It says this promotional DVD is being issued only to specific persons or entities of exclusivefilms.com only. DVD itself and the cover jacket are designed by Robert Hendrickson. If both do not have an original signature and or the cover does not identify the person or entity, as mine does, to whom it has been issued, the DVD is likely to be pirated. So Robert Hendrickson essentially retained all rights, and he distributes. It's like the DVD equivalent of four-walling your movie. He didn't go from town to town, selling the DVDs. He went on the internet, and he provided something that people had been looking for. The videotape was a much rented object, and I owned it at one time. It came in a giant black box with the three kind of women who spearheaded what was left of the family after the members had gone to prison, including Manson, of course. Hendrickson didn't win his Oscar, but he won his place in cult film history. And that's kind of how I'm approaching this. I really think it's one of the greatest documentaries ever made. Regardless of what your personal feelings are about the people talked about. Again, we've talked about this before about people becoming reactionary about things like a Serbian film, and I'm like, it's fiction. Okay, now this is not fiction. The fiction that people react against is the legend. A lot of the misinformation, disinformation, urban legends, tall tales, whatever you want to call them. I'm grasping for the right words because I know there are more correct words, more descriptive words. But, essentially, these apocryphal stories of Manson have been planted in swaths of the public consciousness, especially in America. And because it really had quite an impact on America, obviously. It was the longest criminal trial ever at the time it was held. Bugliosi wrote Helter Skelter, became a huge instant bestseller. So within a year or two, they made the two-part movie, which they didn't label those kind of things miniseries back then, but that came a little later in the 70s. There was floating around a cut that was, I think, 2.5 or 3 hours long that had scenes cut. The DVD I had, it was one Warner Brothers at a snap case, very, very uninspired shot of Railsback as Manson with his hands behind his back, handcuffed, he's grinning like a fool. Not very iconic there. Kind of silly. And a lot of people made fun of Railsback's performance. I have at times. It's out of control. But Manson himself is fucking out of control. Obvious. If any of you have ever seen him on film talking, you know that. However, I don't think everything he says is evil or insane. Sometimes it takes an insane man to see through the insanity that we accept as our lives. And, you know, I hate to use this phrase because it's been ruined by Trump supporters, but tell it like it is. That saying was around since before I was born. But, you know, people are like, I love Trump. He tells it like it is, not like other politicians. Well, he isn't like other politicians, and he does tell it, you know, in very indiscreet and crude terms. But as it is, he does throw some truth bombs out that awaken some people, but in the end, he's serving the same masters, and his goals are the same, you know, as the people that he's claiming to be the enemy of. It's a big club, and we ain't in it. But Trump and his opponents are. Manson spent his life outside of society, mostly in prison. It's hard weeding through the stuff that I've read. First of all, I haven't read everything. Second of all, I have read the key texts and seen the key films, several of them. Yes, quite a few of the films. Most that I know of, most of the Manson films, most, if not all of the Manson films, and most of the notable films that are kind of about him, that evoke him, but, you know, change his name or whatever. But I'm not going to go into all of those at this time. I mean, I'm going to talk a little about Helter Skelter, the movie, but I think that's important. I might talk a little about Van Weber. But mainly I'm talking about this movie. And that's the thing. This is extreme and forgotten. Why is it forgotten? I kind of think it would be a taboo thing to put out. I think if Hendrickson licensed the Blu-ray rights to a boutique label, I think they would do a good job with it. It would be beautiful, but it'd be one of those hot potato kind of things, like a Serbian film. It'd be like, there are people who are going to stand up behind it, and there are people that are going to be like, this is in poor taste, man. The victims' families should get all the money for this. So I am of several minds on this. I've tried to keep my mind open over the decades, literally decades, since I've been aware of Charles Manson, interested in Charles Manson, befuddled and bemused and confused by Charles Manson. Let me read about Manson, the documentary. In the dark morning hours of August 9th, 1969, four assassins clothed in black besieged the home of a beautiful starlet named Sharon Tate. They unleashed their swords and splattered a trail of blood and warnings to be felt from Los Angeles to the far corners of the world. While police investigators and newsmen were scrambling for information on a suspected, quote-unquote, hippie cult leader and his family capital, which was that they were, Manson family was capitalized. Producer Robert Hendrickson had already made contact with and was filming the soon-to-be notorious Manson gang. So he has the advantage, and whoever helped him put the footage together. There was a key guy, and I can't remember his name, and sometimes he's credited as the co-director. Though Robert Hendrickson, from what he told me in email, he produced and directed this film himself and shot a lot of it. And, you know, had other people shoot it, directed them to shoot it. Conducted some of the interviews. It was a passion project for him. He captured a moment in history. See, I'm going all over tangents like I used to, but bear with me. I mean, this is the kind of thing that provokes these kind of tangents, these thoughts, you know, and I'm not writing an essay or a thesis. I'm talking to you guys, and please, by all means, leave comments or like or dislike or subscribe. I'm going to read the rest of this. No actors appear in the motion picture. Only Charles Manson, his family, children, killers, revolutionaries, victims, prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi, and the people involved. They could have used a semicolon instead of a comma. The true Manson family story, quote unquote, is beyond any writer's imagination. But it and what has become known as the crime of the century is documented in a Robert Hendrickson film, Manson. Copyright 1973 to Bond International Pictures, 1973. I said that. Color, it says it twice too. 83 minutes widescreen, region 1 DVD, limited edition DVD artwork and text are copyright 2008 to Bond. So I'm assuming to Bond is basically Hendrickson's production. All right. So, like I said, I was a kid. I saw Helter Skelter. I thought it was a trip. My mom was obsessed with true crime and mystery. Of course, everyone hated Manson. Thought he should all be killed and executed. That's without saying. But my mom also had worked in movie theaters, and she was really a gossip monger. She knew the names of every actor. She knew their real names, their love lives, their scandals. And, and that's how I heard of Kenneth Anger, because she bought Hollywood Babylon. And some of Hollywood Babylon is shockingly real. And some of it is innuendo that Anger has kind of canonized. Kenneth Anger grew up in Hollywood. His grandmother was a makeup artist. He appeared in the 1930s Midsummer Night's Dream. I forgot which character he played. No. Something, I don't know. Mickey Rooney played Puck. Make of that whatever you wish. But so, but Manson didn't preoccupy me. He kind of scared me. I kind of was like everyone else. I was like, this guy's a lunatic, man. I think the next thing that it was a long time before anything really changed my perspective or spurred my interest. In the 1980s, I knew a band called Anti-Scene. They are still together in their current incarnation, led as they've always been by Jeff Clayton, who I know personally. I've not talked to him lately, but known him personally for many, many years. Knew Joe Young even better, the guitar player and co-founder, who unfortunately passed a few years ago. But they were into the Manson thing, the iconography, and as I met more punks and goths, I saw that was that shock thing, more industrial gearheads, just like swastikas and punk rock. They used any kind of image that was taboo to the mainstream culture, the establishment. And it's really fucked up how 50 years later, that 50 years is when Manson did all this. The time I'm talking about when this kind of stuff was paraded about as emblems to be displayed to shock by the punk and post-punk scenes. We're talking like the 80s and 90s. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, so it took a long time for this shit to filter. It starts in California, moves to New York. Eventually, Charlotte gets hip. It's always been this way. We're kind of, we're a strange city. But that's how I started experiencing it, was as part of that like taboo people that people think are evil and you're into because it's shocking. What I was going to say is now 30 years later, you can do the stuff depending on where you live and what how far you go. You can't do the stuff that people did back then. At the very least, you'll be canceled. Your friends will block you. Everyone will shun you in social media. If you're any kind of public figure, you're over. And that's just the least things that could happen. We haven't even got into the government censoring you. So, yeah. But that's the era I grew up in. Okay, didn't grow up in the Manson era. Didn't experience that firsthand. But I grew up in an era where my small town, which kind of became a sprawling city, but it's still a small town, really. Where my small town eventually had, you know, people who were intrigued by the subculture of that era and how far it went. I mean, they were intrigued by people like Bobby Beausoleil and Kenneth Anger and Timothy Leary and Charles Manson, and there's all kinds of connections between all these people. Robert Anton Wilson, who has documented a lot of them. Colin Wilson, who has to Colin Wilson, sorry, and we could go on and on. But that was my nectar, my ambrosia in the '90s was I hungered, I thirsted to read about this stuff. So the research books, capital R, capital E, search, founded by V. Vale, a Japanese American punk rocker, and his then lover Andrea Juno. They had done like a Seek and Destroy, Search and Destroy punk zine at the very end of the '70s. But all through the '80s, they began collecting interviews with these subculture underground figures and artists. And this kind of thing cropped up a lot. You know, I mean, Genesis P. Orridge became one of their close friends, and he was featured in several of their books. He had become an acolyte of William S. Burroughs, personal friend. Genesis P. Orridge, I think, is one of the more important thinkers of our time. I really believe that. Some people will scoff. His writings have been only collected a little bit. I think most of them are out of print. I used to have one called The Psychic Bible, THE, Psychic with a K at the end, Bible, and he signed it. I ordered Borders directly from him, their publisher order program, and he had signed it. It was lost in my last move. But he's an amazing writer. He saw everything, you know. But one thing one of many things he was into. Like Anton LaVey was someone he was fascinated with, and he tried to break down, what is Anton LaVey really about. And again, here we're talking about a stigmatized figure. In the 1960s, he was part of the pop culture, Anton LaVey. But Manson kind of was like that too, and that kind of figure. I don't think Genesis ever met Manson. One thing he would do occasionally, though, was basically say, things aren't as simple as is portrayed in the media, as it's been enshrined in books like Helter Skelter, or to a lesser extent, Ed Sanders' book called, what's this book called? The Family? I think. I can't believe I forgot it. Ed Sanders was a member of the Fugs. They were extreme counterculture, wacky hippie group in the late '70s. They were yippies like Abby Hoffman, very like Dada artists. They were just crazy. One of them, Tuli Kupferberg, has this crazy role in Dusan Makabayev's film WR, Mysteries of the Organism, and he's a trip. And they were anti-war, and they were, peaceniks. They were also kind of cynical and just hated everything, the establishment. I mean, but they weren't hateful like, say, Manson people were. But Ed Sanders' book, I think, was a lot more right on than Bugliosi's book. And see, here's where you have the tug of war of ideas. And I'm not really sure where what's been decided. Because you had people like Genesis who were arguing things, and I knew people personally who had followed this also, who were arguing this. I even knew a guy here in Charlotte who was a pen pal, Patricia Krenwinkel, one of the Manson family, who was arrested and in prison. She felt like she was totally rehabilitated, and so did Leslie Van Houten, another one. So reading Patricia Krenwinkel's correspondence with this guy, which eventually was covered in a regional mag called Creative Loafing, which I wrote for a little while. You're trying to figure out what was the deal, what was true, what was not true. Okay, Manson had a group of people he called the family. And as he put it, I picked your children up off the road. And actually, it's a speech he gives in this movie that was filmed. I think it was filmed by somebody famous from that era who filmed it as an interview. One of the yippies or one of the underground kind of writers or key figures, which I found interesting. And that portion is classic, and it goes on a while, and it's hard to refute the things Manson says. It's hard to not see the wisdom that he's gathered and gleaned from horrible life, which he himself has contributed to making even more horrible by exploiting other people in order to pleasure himself. It kind of backfired on the guy. So, yeah, he had this cult, and a lot of these people, including people like Patricia Krenwinkel, have said, we did a lot of drugs, there was a lot of sex, I was confused, the night of the murders, it's like another reality. And the truth, as I researched it through the years, was that Leslie Van Houten and Patricia Krenwinkel were really accomplices. I believe one of the two of them stabbed a fork in LoBianco's dead body. Yeah, tasteless, and it seems like she's going along with the gang, but she didn't actually kill any living people or animals. The two figures who really are the most vile of the Manson family are Tex Watson, Charles Watson, Tex Watson, and Sadie, Susan Atkins. Susan Atkins is deceased. And they were deeply disturbed people, I believe, before they met Manson. And I believe that it's what Timothy Leary said about acid, time, set, and setting, when you're going to drop it. And also, what you bring into it is going to be enhanced. That's become kind of a cliche about things, but it's true, and I have never done acid. I've been around people on acid. I've read a lot of books about the subject, and I don't judge it. I used to have a really close friend who judged all kinds of hallucinogens and psychedelics, and marijuana, even alcohol to an extent. And he had never done any of them, but he was an expert. He knew exactly everything about them. Do you know anybody like that? So yeah, I believe that it didn't take much of a push for Atkins and Watson to perform these heinous acts. And who knows what Charlie did along the road, in prison, out of prison, to defend himself. His record was mainly thievery and pimping and drug dealing. But in that era, when he came to Haight-Ashbury in 1967, great year. As the guy in the narrator of this movie says, a Venus flytrap among the flowers. He wasn't a hippie, and he claimed he looked like a hippie, but he claimed he was a yippie and all these other things. Slippy was another one. The people who follow him largely were what you would call hippies at that time. However you want to label it. They had long hair, long beards, ran around naked a lot, free love, psychedelics, fuck the Vietnam War, fuck the man, drop out, you know. And so the Manson family was a commune, and maybe for a brief time it was a viable commune, even though really dumpster diving was a lot of their main source of nutrition, and they go into that in this movie. It's fascinating. So, um, but some people became scared of Manson and claimed that he was beginning to talk about an apocalyptic event that he wanted to kick off. And because some people believed him to be a new incarnation of Jesus Christ. A couple people left. One of them was Paul Watkins. They interview him extensively in this movie. I don't know what he acts like now, but he's very hippie, and he really speaks in that slang and jargon. But he's a good guy, and him and his buddy perform some awesome music. That's the soundtrack to this. It's really incredible. I'll credit it, so I don't get a copyright claim hit. But I may put some at the intro to this video. I'm gonna see. I'll see. Not sure that or some memorable Manson quotes. What we're doing here is, okay. So these guys split away and they were, condemned, since they were had death sentences put on them by the family, the remaining family. Kind of like Scientology had those death things in the '60s. Like what happened to Salman Rushdie. When you have a group that puts you on a kill list because you disagree with them, they are a fucking cult. I would never argue otherwise, and they are dangerous. The kill list that's online now, put together by Ukrainians who despise people who disagree with them. They have quite a kill list. And I think a lot of people watching this maybe not, or might be shocked if they actually found out who was on it and why and what extent these people will go to. But it's hard to wake people up. It's hard to make them see that. To me, the people who fetishize the Ukrainians and people like Zelensky and the Azov Battalion and say, oh, they're good Nazis or they're not really Nazis, all this kind of thing. Meanwhile, calling, protesting farmers and truckers, Nazis and white supremacists. This really makes me sick, to be honest. I don't want to get too all into modern politics in this, but come on. The Ukraine is the most corrupt country in all of Europe. That was before any of this happened in February. And I'm not here to talk about who invaded who and what was their justification, but I do believe Zelensky is a very negative force in the world, and maybe Putin is to a lot of people, and Biden. Zelensky and Biden and Trudeau are kind of an unholy trinity of people who are trying to direct the world in a certain direction. But it's dying. The unipolarity of the United States as the hegemonic, empire, it's crumbling. What does this have to do with Charles Manson? Well, just as it would be taboo for me to talk about the Nazis in the Ukraine and the kill list, it was taboo a few years ago when Manson died to basically you had to like, it was like Donald Trump derangement. It was like Manson derangement, and everybody in the subculture on YouTube and I mean on Facebook and social media, all the artists and writers and and all these creative people went out of their way to outdo each other on condemning Manson and what a piece of shit he was and every nasty name in the book. It was a lot like the Trump thing. But Manson has some things in common with Trump, unfortunately, and that's not a compliment or insult to either man, but a sad fact. Um, I believe Manson was a racist. That's bad. Um, do I believe Manson was a serial killer? Hell no. I don't. There's just no evidence. He killed and tortured. He killed one guy, Shorty Shea. He tortured Bob Hinman, Robert Hinman. I forgot his first name. Gary Hinman. He sliced his ear off with a machete. This was a drug deal gone bad, and it did involve another guy who was a black guy that Manson didn't trust. But Manson, he didn't attack that guy. He was probably afraid of him. Manson and I are the same height, 5'2.5". When I had longer hair and this kind of thing was black, people would sometimes say I had that look, and it's a groovy look. It's a cool, you know. But then Manson shaved his head. I mean, I'm rambling, but I'm rambling because do any of you guys have a handle on this? Have you done research? See, this is the thing. Truth is important to me, and I thought the truth about Manson and this stuff had surfaced, thanks to people like Jim Van Bever, who, again, were people who were kind of fetishizing Manson for a time, and people who were, like Axl Rose did, and he covered a couple of his songs, and a number of people were fascinated with, or supported, or capitalized on Manson and his image, and sometimes his words, his what he had to say, what the wisdom he did have in lucid moments. And Jim Van Bever spent years making the Manson family. He had all kinds of obstacles. So it was finally completed, and I read an interview with him where he says, "Now I'm done with Charlie Manson. I don't agree with him or things he did. He should be condemned as a murderer by being the ringleader of those massacres." So I found that interesting. Jim Van Bever has swung far right in his political ideology. He dropped me because I wasn't enough of a Trump lover on Facebook, and a few of my friends too. And only by very offhand things we said. He probably hated Nick Zed. And I don't get where Van Bever's coming from. He created some good work. Manson Family is a really solid movie. Deadbeat at Dawn is, to me, a masterpiece. It, to me, is one of the key films of American underground filmmaking in the 80s, if not ever. I know it's hyperbole. It's on my list. Someone buy me the Blu-ray from Arrow, become a sponsor to the channel. You won't regret it, and I'll do an awesome review. I'm not doing an awesome review now, obviously. I'm rambling, and okay, let me just lay this out where I was at a couple of years before Manson died. I was at the idea that the things that people like Anton LaVey and Genesis P. Orridge and Jim Van Bever were saying, which is that Manson himself didn't kill those people. He's not responsible because he's not the one who took the lives. Everyone is responsible for their own will, and they must be responsible for the actions that their physical body, performs. How is that his fault? Did he hypnotize them? Did he seduce them? Did he coerce them? I believe yes. There was a time when from reading the kind of people I'm talking about, when I felt as though Manson was totally right about the fact that just because he urged someone to do something and they did it, that he should be imprisoned for life for murder. Well, there's that conspiracy law, and so really, and now that's used a lot, even when there's a tenuous thing, if they can just barely prove that there was a person who was paying the killers or knew the killers or kind of nudged them in that direction, they can go to prison for murder. Shit, I watch a lot of true crime videos. So it's not unusual that Manson's in prison for this. The other thing I believed at that time was that Helter Skelter was a myth. That Bugliosi created it out of connections he made that were very tenuous and dodgy. And he used it to make Manson a boogeyman. And you got to remember, the boogeyman in America at that time in the early 70s was Richard Nixon. And there was that famous set of dialogue of newspapers. Nixon denounces Manson, and the next thing, Manson denounces Nixon. Is Nixon more evil than Manson? Yes. Yes, he is. Think of the people who were killed in Laos and Cambodia. He's a mass murderer. Manson is not a serial killer. He's a mass murderer on a small scale. And I don't believe he is ultimately responsible for the murders. I believe he is as responsible, given the conspiracy thing, as the people who actually did it. The people who actually did it have tried to. I'm not talking about people like Patricia Krenwinkel and Leslie Van Houten, who obviously were very drugged out, didn't really do much, mostly accomplices, and they've completely been rehabilitated, seemingly. But I'm talking about Susan and Tex and some of these other characters that went along with it. Bruce Davis, these people are more responsible than Manson, in my opinion. To me, the person who commits the act, that's the murderer. But I agree with the conspiracy thing. If somebody, say that I knew someone who, this is in a lot of true crime channels, like daily I see this stuff. A guy wanted to murder his wife, but he's just talking to people, and there's like a chain of people, and this guy knows that guy, and that guy knows that guy, and you can't really even trace it to him very well. But when you ultimately do, he's responsible. He's going to go to prison for first-degree murder, even though he's going to try to do a manslaughter plea or even, not guilty. So, in the day of Manson, though, this was a cult. This was a whole bunch of people who were involved in the murders. And Bugliosi and the media conflated their lifestyle with these acts and hinged it on the fact that Helter Skelter drove Charlie mad, completely off the rocker, and that's when he started directing people to do more violent acts. I do believe that now, yes. I mean, I believed it when I was growing up. I couldn't articulate it. But for a time, I didn't exactly believe it. Now then, I do want to say, Charlie has unequivocally stated he was not a fan of the Beatles. I do believe there's quite a lot of invention on the part of Bugliosi. Now, there are people like Paul Watkins who were, thrown out of the family because they testified against them. And he says everything was cool until he went on the Helter Skelter trip. And so, I'm not saying there wasn't a Helter Skelter trip. But, when Bugliosi says things in this documentary like, he saw the Beatles as four messianic prophets. No, that's something Bugliosi created out of his noggin, and, I think that I think Bugliosi and Manson are both very manipulative. I'm not saying one's worse than the other morally. I just believe that they're both manipulative people. Manson manipulated his cult, and he's managed to have effect on a lot of other people who, you know, kind of followed him from afar over the years on the internet or corresponding with him, including most guys from Anti-Scene. He went to prison to visit him, I believe. No, or he got a letter from him. I'm sorry. Um, but I feel kind of like um, Bugliosi used the mass media to manipulate people and to cloud their minds. Same way that Charles Manson did. He just had a bigger platform. He had the establishment behind him. You know, Manson didn't want a lawyer. He wanted to represent himself. They all acted crazy in court, and it was just a circus, the cliche. And that's very played up in the movie Helter Skelter, of course. It's infamous. So, I guess what I'm getting at here is that this is a raw look at the family from the time well before the murders, through the trial, after the trial. You see them with long hair, you see them with the head shaven, you see them with the cross, and then you see them make it into a swastika. They do talk about the victims, and they do show a lot of compassion. The narrator of this film, whose name I have forgotten, is incredible. He's like an actor himself. He shows a lot of compassion to the victims. But he does show footage that does make Charles Manson seem sympathetic. People could say, well, yeah, he's a liar, he's, fucking around. But you got to remember, I mean, a lot of the stuff he said, a lot of these wise things that people quote and people are fascinated with, he said in prison. Maybe they didn't inspire people when they heard them, but they weren't harming anybody. There was no cult anymore. Who was listening to him? Whoever was interviewing him, and prison guards and warden, whatever. I mean, it was like natural born killers, which was kind of based on part on that. But who was Manson hurting in prison with these words? Manson was basically telling his story. Now, there's a book called Manson in His Own Words by, as told to Neil Emmons. I really liked that book a lot. And it really, again, it made me feel sympathetic toward Charles Manson up to a point. Now, he disavowed Neil Emmons. He said that's all bullshit. He didn't say any of that stuff. So what was true and what wasn't? If Manson himself is changing it, and Manson's major precepts that he argued through the trial and all through the years originally was, when he says things like, now is the only thing that's real. You can say Columbus sailed on an ocean. It was a different ocean. It's a different world. You can say that, I perform these acts. You can lock up my physical body. You can put me on the cross. What are you doing? A lot of what I think resonated with some people, including myself to an extent, was he was saying that self-determination, self-determinism, however you want to put it, that yes, your perception is what's real. It's kind of a Hindu kind of thing. It's kind of like Maya illusion. We are experiencing a consensus reality. But now when you're on mind-altering substances, reality is different. Is that reality not true because it's not empirically completely, it's deep and heavy stuff. And I believe Manson was a brilliant man. He had no formal education. He started stealing when he was a kid. His mother was, a prostitute. His father was really unknown. You know, he went to jail and reform school at a young age, probably by 12 or 13. He'd been sodomized a few times. Um, got out, you know, jumped on the, you know, railroad, all that cliche of him like jumping on a railroad car and going wherever. He was a hobo in the late 40s through the 50s. And then he went to prison for a while, and when he came out, it was like, there was a lot of hate in him. I think once he went to prison, the hate wasn't spent, but it was directed. You know, he had so much time to think. Now there were other members of his family, like Sandra Good, who Squeaky Fromm, who followed him way after these events, and of course Squeaky Fromm, you know, is going to be in prison until she died because she pulled a gun on Gerald Ford, president at the time. I'm pretty sure the gun was not loaded, but um, imagine if someone had done that to George W. Bush, man, they'd have been in Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib. Um, so, you know, and those people believed in Manson and they still kind of worshiped him and they really received that wisdom. And some of them created things like I think it's called the Air Trees Water something, like ATW. It was their main website. Access Manson was the main website. And Sandra Good and the other chick, I can't remember her name, not Squeaky Fromm, but one of the three that are featured prominently in this film throughout, who were not, you know, imprisoned. Um, Sandra Good kept it going for quite a long time, and it was almost kind of sad and pitiful. I mean, it's a deep rabbit hole. Uh, it's easy to write it off and say he was a nut. He formed a cult. He did whatever, you know. I don't see it that way. I think there's a larger problem. Uh, I think, well, Sandra Good and some of these girls say in the movie, I watched Combat. I watched Combat every week. The big, strong dude came in and beat up the bad guys. Violence every day pumped into their head through television. I don't believe television makes you perform violence. Or, no, but I believe it exposes you to the idea that violence may be a way to solve a problem. And if you are mentally ill or if you are susceptible, impressionable to other people's will, then you can start to accept that and then throw in some drugs, and there may be a cocktail created that's going to create a murderer. Um, I think in a lot of cases, I think Susan Atkins is a good example. Um, so round and round and round, you know. If anyone's interested in this, I suggest you check out the movie Helter Skelter and the movie The Manson Family. The book Helter Skelter and the book The Family by Ed Sanders. I think that's what it's called. Manson, in his own words, I wouldn't waste time with it because you'll just be disillusioned like I was. Manson was a man, a human being. You know, he had worth, but he and society, you know, they twain never met. You know, I mean, and that wasn't, some of it was his fault as a young person. A lot of it was not his fault. I'm not one of these people who thinks, well, then he was abused, what's happened, he should be forgiven. I used to be a Christian, and I believed those kind of things. I believed Charles Manson should be forgiven. I believed a lot of people should be forgiven. Now, if Charles Manson killed my daughter, yeah, I'd probably go to those parole hearings every couple of years, like Sharon Tate's mother, you know? There's all these angles to it, you know. But one thing is indisputable. he is an icon and a legend, for better or worse. I think if this movie were released on Blu-ray, it would start some conversations, but maybe they're conversations that we like need to have. Uh, what is so compelling about this guy? Why did he fascinate so many people? Why did so many people find meaning in his words and his music, which I think is very good? Um, and then what about the people who, like the ones who were on Facebook when he died? It's like, piece of shit, motherfucker. Hope he burns in hell. I mean, I get it. And they say the same thing about things. They said the same things about Donald Trump during the same time period. You know, so that kind of makes you feel weird that they're saying these kind of things that, not to me, but to a nationalist would be considered traitorous. About, I want to kill Trump and blah blah blah, and take his head, in a performance piece by Kathy Griffin. That's so cool. What if a comedian did a performance piece with the head of Joe Biden and fake blood? They probably wouldn't. They probably wouldn't have any venues after that. So that's what I do think. There's a through line to where we are now. Manson's dead, though. Susan Atkins dead. A lot of these people are dead. I'll be honest, I was pretty glad when Susan Atkins kicked it. But I don't believe Charles Manson was evil incarnate. And I do believe crimes of this nature, you should look at the larger situation that breeds crime. Poverty and being jailed for drugs and all kinds of things. And it's still going on, this cycle. It's probably a bunch of new Mansons waiting to happen. And they're going to tarnish the leftist movement that I think is really incredible. That's growing now. Maybe Manson was a psyop to do that. I don't personally believe that. I have read that theory. Jim Jones, I believe he was a psyop of sorts. He had a lot of CIA connections, but I don't believe he did this. What he did was to kind of make a point, like a false flag, or change the culture. But I do believe that Manson, he was used, he was scapegoated, and he did give a lot of Americans a boogeyman and a reason to like I can, now have permission to hate hippies. Well, what do I know? I mean, when this stuff was happening, I was, an infant and then a little child. And from what I've been told, I hear wildly disparate stories about Charlotte. Some people told me there were no hippies in Charlotte in 68, 69, 70, 71. And then other people told me, yeah, man, we had a bunch of head shops. And I remember we had a lot of health food stores, and vegetarianism was becoming a thing. I want to apologize for running over so long and maybe not making a point. My point is this should be on Blu-ray. That's obvious. How do I feel about the movie now? I told you how I feel about Manson now. I told you what I felt then, and I've kind of amended some of my things. And that's a good thing. I mean, for all the bullshit those people wrote about Manson when he died, uninformed and just hateful, reactionary. That was valuable reading that. Knowing the kind of depth of reaction an average person who has no involvement with this, not even as much involvement as me making this video or researching Manson. Just somebody's like, oh, Charles Manson, I'm glad he's dead, the motherfucker. But ask this person a few questions about Charles Manson and what's the deal, and they don't care. Or you could be like, You know, you could be like Genesis Peorage or Boyd Rice or somebody and say, you know, Charles Manson never really murdered anybody with his own hands. He was not a serial killer. But that's true. I mean, maybe he did murder some people in the 50s when he was a hobo. There's no evidence of it. I mean, you know, he did kill one guy. And that, I'm not saying that's bad, good, it's horrible. But so, yes, Manson is responsible for the crimes, but he's not ultimately responsible. I mean, or maybe you could say, no, I don't think he's ultimately responsible. I think he was a trigger. Uh, what created the situation where there was a trigger? And I believe it was America. I believe that was an inconceivable time to me. We're starting to come close to that time again, that kind of time. Are we going to change the world for the better this time? Or are we going to be hated like Charles Manson and well, I was going to say smeared. Well, we will be smeared. He wasn't smeared. He did a lot. He did enough bad shit. He didn't need to be smeared. Um, I find him amusing now, and I watch his ranting, and I do find some wisdom in some of his words, and I enjoy his out of line. But I'm not a supporter. I'm not a fan, you know. And I see, you know, I get where Jim Van Bever is coming from, but again, Jim Van Bever turned from a man fascinated with Charles Manson and looking at different sides of this to supporting Donald Trump like rabidly. Again, I'm not comparing Manson and Trump, who's morally superior, any more than I was Bugliosi and Manson. I did compare Manson and Nixon, and I do believe Nixon is worse. Trump Trump also ordered some bombings of some brown people and their kids, continuing a hallowed tradition of American presidents. I'd say he's worse than Manson. So I'm just throwing out food for thought. I recommend you see this if you can find a copy. I don't know if Hendrickson's still doing this deal. Damn it, there needs to be a Blu-ray. Hendrickson, if you're alive and still, I mean, I think he's alive, you're still trying to make money, I would get in touch with Vinegar Syndrome, Arrow, or Severin would be awesome. And then just let the controversy blow up. A lot of people will hate me for doing this video, probably, and misunderstand and misinterpret things I'm saying. This has not been linear. I set out some things I wanted to achieve. I think I did. I think I did make all those four or five points I set out like a half hour ago. I didn't necessarily make them in order or in any kind of have any connective tissue between them. But this is the kind of conversation that I'd like to have with people. These are the kind of conversations I used to have with a lot of people. I miss those days. And it saddens me because I'm much more aware and self-aware and, yes, awake, or the word that was stolen by liberals and conservatives, woke, which was from black culture. And it meant a person who they finally are awake and see this world for what it is. You know, it's like a matrix like moment, you know. And I hate that word's been tarnished and tainted. And even people I follow, like Jackson Hinkle, uses it casually to describe liberals who virtue signal. He should stop though. He should stop because my buddies that well, not my buddies. I wish they were my buddies. The people I follow at Revolutionary Blackout Network have been like, Jackson, you go up to an old black man and you start ragging on woke, and he smack you. You know, that's not exactly what he said, but Jackson is young and he's still ignorant in a lot of ways, and he's tipping conservative in certain ways. But I do recommend his channel. He's done important, crucial work on the Ukraine war. The Revolutionary Blackout Network is an essential channel. So Manson is a political movie. I mean, if you want to get down to it, it's really kind of a socio-political film, and it is kind of a horror, psychedelic horror film, but it has a vibe and a movement. Watkins' music is really beautiful. He really should have become a real professional. I mean, Bobby Beausoleil also was a brilliant musician, and he did the great soundtrack to Kenneth Anger's Lucifer Rising. I don't know what's up with Kenneth Anger's movies. If I can't find out anything solid soon, I'll probably make Extreme Forgotten about them. I guess I could talk a while. I'd rather just make another video about something else. But listen, I just wanted to say Manson is not God. Manson is not Satan. And Manson is not a mirror. He's whatever you see in him, he is, or whatever you see of yourself. All that stuff he said is philosophy. Like I said, which was a lot like Eastern philosophy. Jodorowsky has said many similar things. But I do believe there's a kernel of truth in that, because I do believe that's one way of looking at the world. And I think for artists and mystics, I think it's, I don't know, I think it's a crucial way of looking at the world, and that's being awake. So, anyway, thank you for listening. Sorry about the length. Please subscribe. Please like. I hope this video will start to get me back on some momentum. I'm gonna watch another movie this week, and I'll definitely do a review right afterwards. And I'm also going to finally be reviewing The Children of Minerva. They're not boring. Sorry, I'm just tired. The Children of Minerva album, which my good friend and channel patron Mick Cantone, the leader of the group, has wanted me to do for a while. His stuff is a bit complex, so I asked him tonight to break down some things for me so I could do him justice. And he agreed. So I told him within a week. That's my goal. I have like 5 videos laid out. This one was not laid out. This is pure spontaneity. But I love you guys, and I've got some exciting Extreme Forgotten ones to lay on you, and I've got some exciting Blu-rays in my library that I want to talk to you about. Out of the Blue, Funky Forest. Is it the name of it? Funky Forest. I called it Fuzzy Forest. That's crazy. That's been hard to figure out how to talk about. And a lot of other stuff. I wanted to do a Godard tribute of my own. I may still do that. It just depends. It'll have to be spontaneous like this. Beyond that, not going to be doing any superheroes for a long time. If I get requests to do a She-Hulk, I'll do a She-Hulk when it's over. One more episode. I'm determined to build this channel bigger. I'm determined to get this channel monetized. I'm ambitious about this. I'm ambitious about Flickr Street, but this is connecting quicker, and that can only help me get Flickr Street out there. And my energy is positive, and it's expressive, and it expresses a viewpoint of someone who wants to change the world for the better. My mother used to tell me, she had lost an ovary young, and she was about to lose the other one. My father, his sperm was not motile, as they used to call it scientifically. He had to take some kind of pills, and they had to keep at it. I'll think about that. And it happened, and I was born. And my mom said, "You're my miracle child." you're going to save the world one day. Now, that has not gone to my head and made me a megalomaniac like Charles Manson. Like, I am chosen. My mom told me I'm going to save the world. But I used to talk to my ex-girlfriend, Stevie, and my ex-fiance. We had similar discussions that we wanted to try to change the world for the better, do our part. And I'm pretty determined to do that. And some things I do, like Flicker Street, you may not think that's doing anything, but yeah, it is. It's a mirror to this world, and entertainment can draw someone in and wake them up, then awesome. If my stupid reviews can make you think about something, that's cool. Research the shit for yourself, man. Think whatever you want. It's all good. All I can say is, last thing on this movie, this was an important part of my early movie watching. I watched it so many times on tape. Well, I had taped it, actually. Tape to tape. I watched that one. Then I got the big box. Watched it so many times. And then I got this. Watched a couple of times. Put it away for a couple of years, few years. When I decided I was going to do this eventually, I pulled it out about 3 weeks ago. I watched it. And then I kept it on and watched it again in my bedroom while I was doing stuff. And it's just like this familiar friend. It's just fascinating. And really, this is kind of the birth of my love of the true crime videos. This is really like the masterwork that all these channels aspire to. But Robert Hendrickson, you have fucking nailed it, bro. Please license your movie. Get the Blu-ray out. Love you. Love all you guys. Rock on. Did I hit the right button? See, I never hit the fucking right button. All right, let's try this.